happened at the cabin with me and with other people. And we would have experiences where people in one room would encounter a dead friend, and in another room there were visitors. And it was like that. Or a perfect example, Anne Secretary Laurie Barnes, who was an experiencer herself, and was walking down the road one evening, and suddenly there stood her brother. Now, what made that remarkable was he had disappeared without a trace 20 years before and been declared dead by the FBI. And she said, "Oh my God, where have you been?" And he smiled at her and he said, "I just wanted to tell you that I'm all right."
Whitley Strieber is the author of The Wolfen, The Hunger, Superstorm, Communion, and a library of books, which makes him the most prolific author in UFOlogy. Tonight, we may be talking about the strangest, most powerful, and potentially important thing that has ever happened to mankind. That and more is coming right up on My Alien Life. My Alien Life is recorded live from atop the Northern Rocky Mountains and is available on Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes, and everywhere fine podcasts are found. My website is at www.myalienlifepodcast.com. There you will find my email address, all previously recorded shows, and more. I am Cameron Brower. This is My Alien Life, and the podcast starts right now.
My Alien Life Podcast.
Three, two, 1, 0, and liftoff.
It's my honor tonight to have such an esteemed writer in the studio because he does it so well. In 1992, I finished the book Communion after attempting to read it over a period of 2 years. Writers like to use the word verisimilitude, and this book is that to the 10th power. Whitley Strieber's latest work is called A New World, and it's a communion between us and everything else. Whitley Strieber, thank you so much for joining me, and welcome.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Great to have you tonight. I actually had a friend reach out to me today because they knew that we were going to speak, and then they commented on your extraordinary life, and I became quite curious because they were telling me in July you were at the Pine Ridge Reservation, and I heard the story a little bit, and it sounded like you had an amazing experience with a common friend while you were driving through South Dakota. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
Oh, yes. I certainly do, very well. It's covered in my new book, in the Afterlife Revolution, extensively, in a chapter called The Fields of Asphodel. And you find out exactly what those fields are if you read the book. What happened in Pine Ridge was I went to the reservation to a small conference that was held at the All Nations Gathering Center there. It's only about 20 participants. And on the first day of the conference, the distances are long on the Pine Ridge Reservation. It's a big place. I was being taken somewhere in a car, riding along, and about a 10 or 15 mile trip, and I closed my eyes for a few minutes because I was pretty tired. And to my amazement, behind my closed eyes, I saw another version of the world. And this wasn't something that just flashed past for a moment. It remained like that all weekend. Every time I closed my eyes, it was like putting on a virtual reality headset. It was the most amazing thing I've ever experienced. It was not a hallucination. They don't work like that. The brain can't generate a hallucination that lasts that long, I don't think. But in any case, other people in the car, I began to sing out to people. The car was full of other people who were riding to the same place I was, and the first time. And I began to say, hey, listen, can anyone else see that? And one lady did. She could see it too. And a couple of other people could sort of see it, but not as clearly as we could. But she only saw it for the first hour or so, and I saw it the whole weekend, even when I wasn't riding in the car. When we were on the road, give you an idea of what this was like. In this world, there's a graded highway. In that world, there was a much narrower road that was a terrain road. There was no grading on it. The result of this was that when the graded highway, when I had my eyes closed and the graded highway diverted from the terrain and the other road went down the terrain, it felt like the car had taken flight. It was an extraordinary illusion. And when I was not in the car, if I was, say, walking around somewhere, I could close my eyes and see another version of the world all the time, even day and night, for 3 days. I could lean down and look at the ground and close my eyes and see slightly different rocks and flowers and plants, but I could actually count the petals on the little flowers and things on the roadside. It was extraordinary. I could see that the road in the other world was macadammed. In other words, it was just a tar. There was tar on it, not asphalt.
So, have you experienced anything like that since you've returned from South Dakota in July?
No, it ended about 20 miles south of the reservation when I left. On the day I left, Incredible. I could no longer see it about 20 miles south of the reservation. I may have seen it just briefly once here in California, but I don't think so. And I can't conjure it up at will. When it was there, yeah. I was trying to move and go into the other world. I wanted to go into it and see what it was like. But that did not happen.
One of the underlying themes in your books are change, and you've certainly seen a lot of change in your life and made it through a lot of those changes. What in 2015 changed everything for you?
In August of 2015, my wife Ann died after 45 years of a very, very happy marriage. It was a tremendous struggle. It had started in 2013 and went on for those 2 years, and I was devastated. She was my life, and even though we had both known from the previous January that she only had a few months left, when it actually happened, it was just an appalling experience. And about an hour and a half after she passed away, I was sitting in the living room, just sitting there, thinking to myself, Annie, are you anywhere? Do you exist at all in any way? The phone rang. It was a friend of ours, Belle Fuller. And Belle said, Whitley, something strange just happened. I heard Ann's voice say, call Whitley. Is she all right? And I said, Belle, Ann died at 7:45. And of course, Belle burst into tears, and I said, "Honey, I don't know what to make of that." We talked for a couple of minutes, and I hung up. Then a couple of days later, my kids took me out to Palm Springs, and we were in the mountains above the town. I was sitting on a bench; they were out hiking, and I was suddenly myself, I was thinking again, Annie, if you exist, please let me know somehow. And my cell phone rang. And it was a friend from Nashville, Claire Henry. And Claire proceeds to say, Whitley, I just heard Ann say, in just as clear as a bell, call Whitley. And this went on. That was two. There were 4 or 5 of these incidents. And at some point during this period, I remembered something that had happened while we were working on the aftermath of the publication of Communion. In the late 80s and early 90s, literally tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of letters poured in. This was before email. Our email was just sort of getting started, and so people were still writing actual letters, thank God. So we were getting all these letters, and again, they would say that their people's dead relatives and friends were involved. And this would also happen at our cabin. There were many witnesses at our cabin. One of the things you will never hear from the skeptics or the people who want to say that I'm crazy and so forth is that this is probably one of the most generally witnessed occult experiences in history. And so when witnesses were at the cabin, very often when the visitors showed up, the dead would show up too, and that happened on the night that I had the communion experience as well. I didn't put it in the book because I didn't understand it. I understand it much better now. In any case, in September of 2015, by that time, I remembered back then we had not made a pact. We sort of had made a pact, but it wasn't very formal. But we had said to each other that the first one to die will try to come back to friends who know nothing about it before they try to recontact the one who's still alive, if it's possible, because there won't be any. That way, both of us, neither one of us. If Anne had come back just to me, I would just assumed, it's your imagination, and the same would be true of her because that's the way our minds worked. And still do, for that matter. So the idea was we would go back to unsuspecting friends. And I realized at some point over the couple of weeks that, my God, this is what she's doing. She's doing it. And that changed everything. Then I began to realize that Anne still existed. And she did still exist. And we got back into touch together. And I ended up writing a book with my wife called The Afterlife Revolution, after she was dead. One author is one on this side of the fence, and the other author is on the other side of the fence. Amazing.
Incredible.
Yeah. So now, in the same period, the visitors return. Let me now roll back to, we did Communion, and then they kept coming, and so there was another book, Transformation. They kept coming. There was another book, Breakthrough, and it began to tail off. There's some experiences described in the last book of the series. It's really not. It's Confirmation, and then some childhood experiences in the secret school. But basically, after Breakthrough, they were essentially gone. There were a few things, pretty dramatic things that happened later, but like the Master of the Key, who I met in a hotel in Toronto, he was a man, but he was an absolutely remarkable person who left me with a very rich, had an incredible conversation with him that is transcribed in the book The Key. But the actual sort of official kind of close encounter experiences weren't happening, so there were no more books. There was something that happened in 2007 that I go into in A New World. But then, at the same time, Anne was establishing herself as a real presence and that had survived death. The visitors returned to my life. And I really don't see them as aliens anymore. I see us all as part of a continuity of consciousness. And the lines between the idea of alien from another planet versus us is just sort of blurred in my mind. I'm sure there are, but spiritually we're all together.
Is it helpful for you to know that? Because I know it was terrifying at times.
It was terrifying for years. I decided early on that I would go for this because, my God, they were real. They were real. And I was going to find out more. I was definitely going to find out more. So what I did was I started going out in the woods in the night to announce to them, I'm ready for more. I'm ready to meet you again. This was after the communion experience. This was not easy. It was because they're terrifying. I mean, they were just absolutely terrifying. They were tough. They were very hard on me on December the 26th, 1985. And the idea of going out into the woods to meet people or beings who had done those things to me was rough. But what else was I going to do? Sit in my house with my arms folded and kvetch about it? That's not me. I wanted to know more, and so I went out in the woods and I engaged with them, and that was the rest of my life started there. We had unbelievable experiences at that cabin with big groups of people, just peak experiences. For example, and this is something I don't talk about, never to talk about in those days, because, people would snicker, and I was already the rectal probe man and a big joke. So I kind of pulled in my horns. I didn't say, I've never spoken about not even half of what actually happened, because I don't like to be laughed at. And I would like people to have some ability to realize that there's something going on here, that this is real, instead of just snickering and saying, oh, he's a nut. But in any case, there was a little UFO used to show up there, and some of us got rides on it. That happened. And I think one of the other people who had that is about to admit that happened. And that was extraordinary. It was absolutely amazing. So a lot happened at the cabin with me and with other people. And we would have experiences where people in one room would encounter a dead friend, and in another room there were visitors. And it was like that. Or a perfect example is Ann's secretary, Laurie Barnes, who was an experiencer herself, and how she became Ann's secretary is also a cool story, was walking down the road one evening, and suddenly there stood her brother. Now, what made that remarkable was he had disappeared without a trace 20 years before and been declared dead by the FBI. No one knew what happened to him. So, and then suddenly there he was, and she said, oh my God, where have you been? And he just smiled at her, and she said, why don't you come down to the cabin and meet my friends? And he said, I just wanted to tell you that I'm all right. And he kind of drifted back into the woods and disappeared. She came sort of staggering, as you may imagine, down to the cabin and told us what happened. And Ann said to me very quietly, the visitors will be here tonight. And they were. They came in that night and they encountered Laurie Barnes, Raven Dana, another woman who was in the room with Laurie Barnes, Drew Cummings, a filmmaker, his wife, and two other people, all that one night. And these were physical encounters, not like something you sensed. They were involved touching and holding of hands and things like that. So, and that was the cabin. That was life at the cabin. And then the laughter began to get louder. And I got, people will buy a book from someone who's controversial or weird. That's interesting. They'll do that. But you give them a book by somebody who's a laughingstock, forget it. They're not going to buy that book. And then South Park came out making, in its pilot episode, which had huge ratings, made a laughingstock of me. And the creators of South Park even went on an interview show and said they were very careful to do that in such a way that I couldn't sue them, because they wanted to wreck me. They wanted to do that. People love a lie on planet Earth, and they hate the truth. And somebody telling the truth is going to get beat up, and that has happened to me. In any case, we lost the cabin. We lost all of that extraordinary, miraculous stuff that was going on there. And we moved down to Texas. A lot of stuff started happening in Texas, of course, and stopped happening in upstate New York. So it kind of moved with us, which is fine. And
They put you through a lot, and I honestly feel that no one should go through that. Do you feel that the visitors have empathy or sympathy, either and or?
of course they do. They're the greatest teachers you could never imagine having. They have stuck with me through thick and thin for 30 years of struggle with this very slow learner. And they have taught me many of the real secrets of this universe that I could never know any other way. They're wonderful teachers, and they're very hard, and they're dangerous. They're a very big, complex presence. Not everyone is nice in that world of theirs any more than in our world. We always think because we know so little about them, we think of them in a very unitary way. Like, they're evil reptilians and weird grays and nice blondes. But you're talking about a huge, ancient, and complicated presence, the true nature of which we don't even know yet. And look at Earth. I mean, turn the tables. And just a few years ago, Gandhi and Hitler were living here on the same planet.
True.
You could meet a Buddhist monk or an SS officer on the same planet. You could have met them on the same day. So if we were able to go to other worlds and everyone was able to travel and it wasn't even very difficult, then God knows what those people would think on the other worlds. That one person would think, well, they're saints and scholars. Another person would say, they butchered my son and ate him for supper because it was different people with different attitudes. So we have to face that. This is not going to be simple. It's not going to be what, when we don't really think very deeply about it, we think very casually about it. It's not going to be like that. It's going to be real. And real means complex, contradictory, and mystifying.
I saw you at a conference and you said something very surprising to me, and I really don't know why I thought it was surprising, but you had mentioned that to the audience that your implant was active. Is the implant still active?
Yes. It isn't active right now. I tested it this afternoon, and there's nothing going on. But some things happened during the day that suggested it might still be active. In any case, the implant was placed in my body in May of 1989. I was in bed in the cabin. The windows were open because it was a warm night. And I heard the crunching of gravel in the driveway, and there were no car lights, and that we had a big gate, so it scared the hell out of me. I figured somebody I don't want to be here is here. By that time, I was not really afraid of visitors anymore. They were coming and going in the cabin a lot, all the time, and it was pretty much an ordinary part of our lives. They weren't they were very discreet and shy. You didn't see them a lot, but you knew they were there, and you did see them from time to time. I was concerned about people, because people who would work and do yard work and stuff at the cabin would see them from time to time, and stories were circulating and around in the area that these demons were living there, and that I was a demon. And people are very superstitious and scared. And I thought, well, it's I'm gonna probably get myself killed here sooner or later. So I was pretty gunned up, and I had floodlights all around the cabin that you could turn on with switches right beside the bed and everything, and an alarm system that was at that time very sophisticated. And we had all of that stuff. And I hear this crunching of gravel, and then I hear in the backyard a word, as I come fully alert, a male voice in an American accent say "condition red" very quietly. I start to go for the lights, and as I turn toward the switches, I see, to my astonishment, a man and a woman standing in the room. So instead, I start to go for the Benelli riot gun, which is under the bed, fully loaded with gigantic slugs, nice. A really deadly weapon. I do not make that. I end up lying on my side, unable to move, able to hear, and feeling pressure being pushed down on my head, being pushed down into the bed from left to right. And the woman's voice speaking to me very soothingly. This lasts not long. And then there's a great crashing in the woods, a big flash of light. And I jump up, grab not my riot gun, but my pistol, and go running off into the house to see if I can catch whoever the hell it is who breached our alarm system. The system is still armed. There is no sign of any entry point whatsoever. It was never disarmed because I would have heard that, and it would have changed. It would have beeped and changed. The LEDs would have changed to green. If there was someone who had the code and can't come in using the code, I would have noticed it immediately. So after determining the house was still intact, I went upstairs and sat on the bedside for a while and thought, it's hard to believe that was a dream, but I don't know what else it could have been. So I lay down and sort of slept fitfully for the night. In the morning, I told Ann what had happened, what I remembered, and she was kind of non-committal about it because, you know, she heard stories like that twice a week at least or more. So then I go out to get the paper. I open the door into the garage. The alarm system is still armed. The garage door is wide open, and the alarm system is still armed. I hadn't thought to check into the garage the night before. I checked everywhere else. So I disarm the system. The heck with the paper. I call the alarm guy and I say, something is wrong here. And I tell him what I just found. He comes rushing over and checks it out. And he says, there's a huge magnetic field in your garage that is preventing the switches from tripping, even though the door is open.
Wow.
And we have no idea what that is because our equipment can't even come close to creating a magnetic field like that. And the thing is, there's nothing there. Magnetic fields aren't like radio waves. They don't propagate from a distant point. They hang around the magnet or the electromagnet. It's a discrete field, but you couldn't see anything. There was nothing there. So he did the only thing he could do. He changed out the switches. We tried to get the system to download anything that had happened during the night, and it was all garbled. You couldn't do it. So then a couple days later, day after that, my ear began to hurt, and I touched my ear, and I noticed there was this lump in the pinna, which is the top part of my ear. And I thought, holy moly, that's what this was about. They put this thing in my ear. I was horrified. I wanted it out. I almost cut my ear off. And then he was saying, no, don't take it out. We're doing this. Let's try to figure out what it does. I said, well, it's not in your ear. She said, well, what do you think it's on? I said, I'm worried it's tracking me. She says, what are they going to do? Track you when you go down to the grocery store to get a bottle of milk? You don't do anything interesting, Whitley. You're really dull. We're both dull, and we love being dull. We were very kind of we were not. Let's put it this way: it was like, Gladstone and his wife or something. We were not movers and shakers or rock and rollers or anything. We lived very quiet lives. So she was right. There was nothing interesting for anyone to be tracking us over. That was true. But it bothered the hell out of me because it was there, and it used to turn on every once in a while, and the ear would turn bright red, and that was really incredibly creepy. Fast forward, we lose the cabin. We've moved down to a little condo in Texas, and I happen to meet, through a friend, William Mallow, the head of materials science at Southwest Research, and Bill is interested in materials, like things like my implant and the implants that Dr. Roger Lear of California was taking out of people at the time. And so I arranged for Roger to start sending and then bringing us implants. And Bill is studying them, and we're working on this, and it's absolutely fascinating stuff. And one day, my implant turns on in his office, and my ear turns bright red, and he rushes me into a very advanced signals acquisition laboratory. I'm told only that they did acquire a signal, but nothing else about it, because I'm told then that the lab's classified. So 20 years pass. I end up at a library event in San Antonio, and as the crowd is thinning out, a couple of guys come up to me and said, Mr. Strieber, we were at that signals acquisition that happened all those years ago, and we just want you to know that it was only one guy that talked, obviously. Want you to know that was one of the most unusual signal ever acquired, and it's still under study. And I said, well, I want to find out more about it. He said, I'm sorry, it's classified, and he left. They left. So I know it's there. Now, I had for years tried to figure out something I could do with the thing. I mean, they could cause it to transmit. Could I receive maybe from it somehow? So after Annie passed away, everything changed. My contacts with the visitors became much closer, and Annie became involved in the whole thing, because she was right when she said back in the 90s, this has something to do with what we call death. She was absolutely right. And now she was dead, and she was involved in it. So I was sitting in the John one day, and there's a bright white wall in front of me, bright sun on the wall. And I happened to notice movement in my right eye, something sort of flashing along in it. I thought, what in the world could that be? That can't be good. So I closed my left eye and I peer at it, and I noticed there was a neat slit, oblong slit in the eye, and words typed in the Courier typeface are racing through there at a breakneck speed. And I think, what is this? Because this is not a hallucination. This is technology of some kind. I can't read the words. They're moving too fast, but I can see they're there. And after a while working on it, and over a period of weeks, I began to read an occasional word, and I've figured out that I was working on a historical novel at the time, and these words were like a super thesaurus. In other words, they were associative words related to what I was working on that were actually enhancing my ability to do research. And that was my first inkling of what the implant did. I used the implant constantly during the writing of A New World. The book, very frankly, was written in contact with the visitors and the other side, just like Afterlife Revolution. That's how I write now. I don't write alone. I write with others. It's a group writing effort. One of the group is in the physical world, and the rest of them aren't. That's the fact.
So are they verbal signals? Is it a feeling? Can you describe what that feels like to communicate through the implant?
It's words, written words, typed words going through this slit. It's not verbal at all. So literally. I mean, I was thinking figuratively, and that was your interpretation, but you can see that. Yeah, well, they go. It finally was explained to me. It's just a few weeks ago. The beauty of publishing the book through my own company is that experiences that happened 6 weeks ago are in the book. It's not like published by a publisher where it's a year later, and all kinds of things have happened and they're not in the book. This book goes up to September of this year. The latest experiences are from September. So one of the things that happened was this. The implant moved from the top of my ear into about an inch down from where it had been all these years. And I reported this to some doctors who work on this whole area, and I'm not even going to get into who they are. I can't say. In any case, I'm not being mysterious or coy or anything. I can't say. End of story. But they're useful to me because they do give me a lot of insight into what's happening to me. So anyway, I report this, and they immediately want to see if they can see more of the implant. So I get a CAT scan, and it turns out that the implant itself is not there anymore. Only the calcification that was around the little piece of metal that was there. But it's still working, which means
Wow.
it's nanotechnology. It's now in my body somehow. But here's the weirdest part. 2 nights before I had the CAT scan, there came a knock at the door, and there were 2 very nice men there, big as life, and they proceeded to explain the implant to me and to ask me not to have it taken out. And they explained it as, every word of this is in A New World. And actually, there's a bit more about this. In any case, they explained that what it does is it captures ideas from deeper in my mind than I normally have access to, and brings them forward. That's what I'm reading in the little slit that's racing past. And that is an amazing thing, because it's like expands your mind, and it takes things out of your unconscious that you're not able to access directly, and puts them into your conscious mind. And that's why these books I'm writing have got the research in them is incredibly deep. The first one was sort of a practice thing. It was a historical novel called In Hitler's House, a 2-volume historical novel about a young German American who falls in with Hitler in 1931, soon realizes that Hitler is a monster, and ends up being Hitler's quote-unquote friend throughout World War II, when he's actually a spy for the Allies. And it took an enormous amount of research to do this, but I used the implant to do the research and learned how to use it. Then comes time for A New World, and I'm facile at using it, practiced at it, and I used it every single day to work on the book. And to give you an example of what it did, there's not only the little slit, but there's something else it does that I'll explain. I said to the implant, I need to know you tell me something that I know nothing whatsoever about, that it would be useful for me to put in the book, in the New World. And it came up with something called the fine structure constant. I didn't even know what it meant. I Google it, and it turns out to be the greatest mystery of physics. It is the distance between spectrographic lines in the spectrogram of a hydrogen atom, and a spectrogram of hydrogen. And it's always 1/137th. But here's the thing that's so remarkable about it. Unlike the other constants, which we can trace to underlying forces of various kinds in the universe, the fine structure constant is completely arbitrary. It's just there. There's no reason for it. The discoverer of it was a physicist called Wolfgang Pauli, and it just drove him nuts, because he loved it, because it was an intractable problem, and brilliant people love problems like that. So he spent a great part of his life trying to figure out what the fine structure constant was all about. And he met the psychiatrist Carl Jung, who was involved in the study of mythology and deep archetypes in the human mind, and explored in that direction to see that if it had something to do with us, because it's like God just said, oh, this is a nice number, I'll use it. And we don't like that in physics. We want to know why things are as they are. That's the whole point of it. But this is just floating out there. This is a very important concept for the book. It's the centrally most important concept in the book. And it came out of the implant. Ironically, I don't know what the implant is, and I don't know who's behind it, any more than we know what the fine structure constant is. So it's all kinds of stuff. So exciting. Stuff like that is incredibly exciting to me. It's a wonderful thing. What a tool.
Amazing. So what about their interaction with other people other than yourself? American scientists, politicians, are they helping them in any way? Or?
Well, they've had interactions with various politicians, but that's not something I'm going to go into. A couple of scientists, Kary Mullis, Nobel Prize-winning chemist, had a remarkable experience with them at his summer house in Northern California one time. He was out walking in the evening, and suddenly this thing that looked to him like a raccoon with glowing green eyes, which the visitors often have these glowing green eyes, looked up at him from the path and said, "Good evening, Dr. Mullis." And then he has no memory of the next hour. He's passed on now. His daughter disappeared for hours that same night, and they never were able to recover any memories of what happened to her. So I knew Kerry pretty well, and we not that well, but well enough to have a pretty long conversation with him about this. And he couldn't tell if the interaction with them had affected his work. But another scientist who's also mentioned in my book, Dr. Edward Belbruno, who is the 2018 Humboldt Prize winner. The Humboldt Prize is the prize for Germany's top prize for distinguished scientists from outside of Germany. And he was the Humboldt winner, and to give you an idea of how distinguished he is. And some calculations that are very important in orbital dynamics now started, in his opinion, with a close encounter with the visitors. So yeah, that does happen. And I think I'm hoping that my book will enable them to come out a little more, at least, so that scientists and intellectuals and academicians can take the book and use the book as a groundwork for building their own communication with the visitors, and we can speed up our development that way, because we need help here. We got all kinds of things going wrong with our planet. We're leaderless because the reason we're leaderless is not because of some of it's greed, of course, and confusion, but mostly it's because we don't have any real way of changing things. And since the leaders don't have anything to hang their hat on except things that are sort of impossible economic challenges, it gets worse and worse and worse, and we can't seem to turn it around. They could probably help us turn it around because they're very clever and they're very advanced scientifically. So I'm hoping that the book will have that effect, one of the effects it'll have. In February of 2016, I was begging them to come out for just 5 minutes because all the close encounter witnesses pretty much have the same message from them. It is that the environment is in trouble, and it would instantly empower all of these people to come forward and say, look, we've been told this by what amounts to a higher authority. We better get cracking here because we're in real trouble. And their attitude was, there were two problems. One, we were too scared of them, we wouldn't function properly. And two, that there would be no way to communicate with them because we didn't understand them well enough to communicate successfully. And I said, well, I communicated and I'm not that scared of you. And here's what happened. I was lying in bed, sleeping, and I woke up in the middle of the night, and I woke up because there was something between my legs, something substantial. Now, that's a problem for me because I live in a condo in California, and there's nobody in here but me. There are no rats, there are no cats, there are no dogs, there are no animals in here whatsoever. Therefore, what was in the bed with me? And I'm lying there thinking, if I move my legs, is there going to be something there? Because it sure feels like there's something fairly heavy actually lying there between my legs. And I'm thinking about this when I feel little claws and fingers start to close around one of my balls, one of the genitals. And you want to see somebody jump out of a bed? I jumped out of that bed very quickly. At the same time, a black, darker than black flash shot up toward the ceiling and was gone, leaving a huge scratch, not a deep gash, but a big scratch on my calf, my left calf. And it took a year for that scratch to heal. And I realized that what had just happened was a lesson. They were showing me that I was still capable of being frightened of them and of losing control in their presence. But that's the bad side. The good side was it took a lot to do that because they couldn't just walk in the room because they knew I would not be scared of them. But they had to really set it up. But the point was this: if I can still be scared at all, then think how much fear there will be generally for people who have never ever seen them, whose level of practice in this is zero. That began what turned out to be 3 years nearly of lessons in how to write about communicating with them. Not a how-to book, because that's not what they want. They wanted me to have experiences of communicating with them and to write my experiences down so that somebody picks the book up and reads it. It gives them an idea and a flavor of what my experiences were like, and gives them some basic ideas about how to present themselves and announce to the visitors that they're ready for this. And so the result of this is they want every person's contact to be as individual as their faces. They do not want everyone to be following a playbook at all. They want us all to do this on our own. So, and that's what the book is designed to help accomplish. So that's kind of where I am right now.
We started out, you were talking about being able to see a mirror universe. Can we conceivably cross between universes, and have you been looking into that deeper? And is it something that practice makes perfect, or at least proficient?
I can't go between universes. I can't even get out of my body on my own because I don't think they trust me. And they're right not to. They've had plenty of experience with me. If I could get out of my body on my own, God knows what would happen. They take me out every once in a while to demonstrate various things. Like I was at a scientific meeting once, and they pulled me out of my body and it got me to go to one of the scientists so he could see me. And we had a conversation while I was in the non-physical, and then, as he put it, the next morning, and then Whitley went up through the ceiling, which I've done many times. People, a lot of Linda Moulton House saw me when I was out of my body, and other people have too. But so then I ended up going in a very beautiful experience up almost to beyond the stratosphere. I could see the curvature of the earth, and I was so high that I could see the line of dawn. I was on the West Coast. I could see the line of dawn in the middle of the continent. And I went shooting down and ended up on a college campus. And the next morning, when I described the campus to people, the scientist who had seen me had already told, before I got down to breakfast, everybody what had happened, what had happened in the night. And I talked about, it was easy for me to talk about what happened on the campus. And I described it, and two of the other participants said, well, that's our campus, University of North Carolina at Wilmington. A year later, I went there and went to the places in the physical that I had first gone to in the non-physical. And they were there, and they're pretty much the same as I remembered. Amazing to have memories from the non-physical that you would then confirm in the physical, backwards of what we normally do. So those are all incredible peak experiences. And I'm kind of there to demonstrate to people this stuff, to show them that it's real and that it's possible, and that there are ways of doing this, and that we are much bigger than we think, in the sense of being basically hyperdimensional beings who happen to be primarily focused on the physical for at least a part of our existence, this part of our existence. But there's much more. Much more.
You say in the book that the visitors think differently from us. How so?
Yeah. We are physical beings. We need to do things like eat and walk down the street successfully. Therefore, we have what is called, I call, an output strategy. If we look at the world, we see an apple when we're looking at an apple. We see it's an apple. They do not have this need, and I don't think they've evolved an output strategy. I think they have an input strategy. They don't see the world as its outcomes. They see it as its inputs. In other words, they're not going to necessarily see an apple or a person. They're much more likely to see the math that goes into that. And because of this fundamental difference in our natures, it's really hard to communicate. And an example of this, or a sign of the possibility that this is true, is the crop formations. And if you look at the crop formations, there are only a very few of them that have any imagery in them at all, of like faces and stuff that we would probably put in there. Instead, they're all mathematical. And it's like somebody who thinks in mathematics is trying to bridge the gap between the two minds by depositing math that we can see in those crops. And that's why it's things like the Julia sets that appeared early on and so many other mathematically and geometrically oriented formations. They're trying to talk to us. This is communication. Only we don't get it because we see the crops, not the math. We see the design first, not the math that underlies it. But if we saw the math that underlies it, we've never really studied the formations in this context, we would find that they are signals from this other level of reality and signals from a mind that works fundamentally different from our own.
Are they trying to contact us in any other way? I mean, obviously through implants, crop circles. What else? I mean, I think we're used to seeing things that we probably overlook.
Well, I didn't understand a darn thing about the significance of the communications that were going on at the cabin, because they are much more hieroglyphic, for example, than we are. They can communicate to us by example and by illustration more than they do. They don't talk much. When they come around here physically, it's usually completely silent. It doesn't happen often, by the way. I wish I could say, oh, they come out every night and we have coffee together, but unfortunately, that's not the case. But the one or two times I'm aware of their having come here physically, and this was also true at the cabin, and the other couple times in a country house I go to sometimes in Texas. It will conclude. They will be entirely silent physically, and it concludes with a little sigh. Just, oh. And that means it's over. That's the end. We're done. What I didn't understand was that everything that happened at the cabin was like that. It was all symbolic and all representational. They were like acting out the meanings that they were trying to convey. Now, I'm not going to go into all of the stuff that happened there because that's all in my book anyway. But what I am going to say, give you an example, is that the owl and the deer are imagery that is constantly present in the close encounter experience. The first morning after I had my December the 26, 1985 experience, I remembered, I thought I had seen an owl in the house. And Mike Cleland, who has a podcast on my website, unknowncountry.com, has written books about the owl imagery in this. And if you look at the nature of the owl and what the owl does, it turns out this is actually the fact that they identify with owls is the communication. And what a communication says is this: we come silently in the night, we take you out of your little burrow, your bed, and we take you up into the sky, and we completely alter your experience of life. Now, what the owl will do, the owl has superb hearing. They do too, by the way. And can sit in a tree and hear the little creatures running around in their burrows underground. And these creatures can think of themselves as completely safe. But with her strong claws, the owl will drop down over that burrow, rip into the ground, and pull one of these little guys that thinks he's completely safe out of the burrow, climb up into the air with him, kill him and eat him. That is to say, transform him into another level of reality. And the visitors don't generally kill us and eat us, but they have killed people. That has happened. But they do initiate you into another reality, which is exactly what happened to me on the night of December the 26th, 1985, and it happened to millions of people around the world.
So you mentioned, do you know of any instances that somebody has been killed, that it's been a fatal situation between aliens and humans?
I don't know if they're aliens or not, but yeah, it sure has happened. There are cattle mutilations, and there have been human mutilations too. But that doesn't mean every single visitor is dangerous or evil. You know, people have this, this simplified vision of them. They're terribly complex. The ones who are with me would never do anything like that to anybody. They're wonderful people and beings. I'm glad to have them in my life, and I feel completely safe with them. Because 30 years on, they haven't eaten me, and I'm getting to be pretty unappetizing. I'm an old guy now. I'm be like eating an old rooster. So, but yes, there have been human mutilations, I'm pretty sure. Not certain, because one of the things that you have to watch out for is there are elements in the intelligence community and the military who've had really bad times with this, because they shoot first, and when you shoot at somebody, they're not going to be very pleasant about it. You can't expect to shoot at them and then say, well, let's sit down and be friends, because that's not going to work out. So these military people have had a challenge with this. That's for sure. But I've never been violent toward them, and they've never been violent toward me. But I do know that there are cases where there has been violence, for sure.
Is there a definite way or a textbook way that we can contact them that you know of?
I can tell you what I did. I don't know if it'll work for other people. I do an exercise called the sensing exercise. I do it twice a night at 11 and 3. I've been doing it since 1970, pretty much daily. Not at 3 o'clock in the morning every night, though, except until after Annie passed away, and now I do it at 3 o'clock in the morning as well. But because they want that, and they expect that, and so I give them that. So this is an exercise I learned in the Gurdjieff Foundation, and it's quite simple. You just place your attention on your physical body, and it changes. Placing your attention on your nervous system, on your sensation, on your nervous system like that, changes the way your nervous system looks in another level of reality, and they can see the glow, and that's what will draw them to you. And that's what eventually drew them to me, because I've been doing it for 15 years when they showed up. So that's what I do, and whether or not that's a guarantee, because most people who have learned it from me, they'll do it for, 2 or 3 times and nothing happens, and they quit. And they figure, well, it's not going to happen to me. But you have to be very persistent. You have to really want this. You have to be willing to work your tail off for it. And eventually, if you do, eventually they probably will show up in your life. But maybe not. Maybe you'll do it for 20 years, 50 years, and they won't show up. I do know people in the Gurdjieff Foundation who've been doing it longer than I have, and they've never had the slightest trace of a close encounter. So, and I had no idea when it happened to me that it even could happen. I'd had a lot of experience when I was a child, but that was all buried in amnesia. I didn't remember any of it. And so, I don't know if you go out intentionally looking for it, that it might come more quickly. I'm not sure. That wasn't my experience. In my life, it took 15 years, and maybe somebody else's life, it'd take 2 days. I have no idea. But I think you do have to make yourself known and make your presence known.
You've always hedged a bit about who and what they are. So what do you think now? Who and what are they? Well,
I'm going to hedge maybe in different ways just for variety. I don't know what they are. I don't have any idea. I think we could be looking at different forms of the human species because, we have in this world, we have tadpoles and frogs and butterflies and caterpillars. We've got a lot of species with more than one form, and some species with 2 or 3 forms, with 3 forms, I think. So I wouldn't be surprised if they were all human. They feel human, even though they don't look human when you're around them. And I wouldn't be surprised if in those other forms, we're not restricted just to this planet, that we're sort of we're kind of the caterpillars, and they're flitting around. They're the butterflies. They can flit from planet to planet anytime they want to. But it's all basically human. Or they could be from another universe, a parallel universe, because there's a very real possibility. I think it exists because I've seen it. Or they could just be straightforward aliens from another planet. That's not impossible either. I wouldn't discount any of that. But, my wife used to say, the human species is too young to have beliefs. What we need are good questions. And I live by that. To me, the visitors are a really good question. And that's where I stand with it.
What about the fear of them? Can we get over it? Should we?
No, we won't. We'll never get over it because it'd be
impossible.
It is. It's impossible. It also doesn't matter. Getting used to it is different from getting over it. And I'm used to it now. I'm gonna be scared when they show up, and not that scared as I was because the first night I went berserk because you wake up in a room full of giant insects and it turns out to be real. You're concerned. You're very concerned. So. But the fear is part of this experience, and it's an annihilating fear. It's a fear of something worse than death, of ego annihilation, and it is an overwhelmingly powerful fear. You have to get used to it, and once you get used to it, they're not hurting you. They're just here, and they're trying to interact with you and communicate with you. And this, you can feel the fear, but you don't have to go to it. You can let it, you can kind of let it lie. And that's how I do it. But just recently I had a really scary moment and I reacted, to it with just thinking, oh yeah, I'm scared now. And there was a time when I would have lashed out, but I don't do that much anymore. And I hope I'm not, by saying this, tempting them to come show me that I actually could lash out. So, because I've been there and done that. And that's where I got that gash, was bragging about the fact that I wasn't scared. So I'm not going to do that again. I'm going to say right here and now, I am scared at times, and I have accepted that that's part of my being, and always will be.
In your book, do you elaborate what the experience between the dead and the visitors and how they relate and what that relationship is? Do you talk about that in detail?
Oh, yeah. I talk about that in great detail, and what my wife's relationship is and how that all works. And yeah, I talk about it in great detail, and how in the past there were some cultures who understood it pretty well. In the very earliest times, the ancient Egyptians understood this fairly well. And I bring up something called the Pyramid Text of the Pyramid of Yunus, which is the oldest religious text in the world. And we think of it as a religious text, but that's not what it is. It is not the first religious text. It's the last text of soul science, because it was still soul science when the Pyramid of Yunus, when the text was written. But then it changed into religion. And you can see as the text in the text as the idea of the gods literally emerges about 3/4 of the way through the text. And the first part of it is like something from an earlier, higher civilization that we have lost track of. And it's a scientific text about the way the soul works and the way the body and the soul connect to each other, and how second body, as I call it, this electric body that lives in the nervous system, transmits experience from the physical body into the soul. That's all there. And that's not religious, that's scientific. But we lost all of that. We lost it all. One of the visitors once said to a close encounter witness, "Children of the northern people, you wander in eternal darkness." And that is exactly where we are. We in the Western world are wandering in eternal darkness. When somebody says, it gets a report from 300 climate experts showing that there is a very serious problem, and the response is, "I don't believe it," that is wandering in eternal darkness, believe me. So that's pretty much where we are right now, and I think there's a promise of escaping from that darkness and that wandering, and the visitors represent that promise. And that doesn't say it's going to be all sweetness and light, because it's not.
What do you hope your book, The New World, or A New World, will accomplish? Is enlightenment part of that?
Well, I can be very precise about it on one level. I hope that the New World book will enable more coherent and useful contact, and that the visitors will emerge more into more lives, especially the lives of people who can make change in this world and help us heal our planet, and that they will give them ideas and feed them ideas that will help them do that, just like they fed Bruno ideas about orbital dynamics, or indirectly did, but that happened. I want more of that, and that's part of my hope. And I hope that the book gives a grounding for two things. You don't have to believe in God. You don't have to believe in aliens. You don't have to believe in one single thing. All you have to do is do the sensing exercise, and if they're going to show up, they eventually probably will. If you have something to give and something that they think would be useful in the world, they'll probably show up in your life. I mean, they're not going to be there to entertain people. This is not about that. People pay some cats, one guy or another, a whole bunch of money to go sit out on a lawn, and he shines laser beams up in the sky, and the visitors will usually show up, and not always, but they will sometimes, and hang around for a couple minutes and let him earn his money. They're nice that way, but it doesn't amount to anything. It doesn't result. There's no follow on, because the people don't know what to do next. The book lays that out fairly clearly. You can attract their attention, and then it shows you what you could do next to make the relationship deepen. But it also shows the dangers of doing that just for fun and for entertainment, because they're not fooling around. This is real serious. It's extremely serious, because it's about the future of the human race and of our relationship with them. And the future of the human race is a machine for building immortal souls. And it doesn't happen all that often, but it can happen here. And that makes this place incredibly precious. And the loss of it would be a fantastic tragedy. So they're serious. They're not entertainers. If you want to just be entertained by this and say, "Oh, it's cool, I had a close encounter the third kind," you're liable to end up on the dinner table. I'm telling you, don't do that. If you're going to do this, you be willing to give it your life, because that's what's going to be asked of you. Not your death, but your life. to give your life to it and to live it and to show others how to do the same. This is what my life is. It's what I do. I do it every day of my life. And I made that commitment a long time ago, and so did Annie. Annie gave her life for this, and I will too. It'll kill me one of these days, one way or another, and I don't care. It'll exhaust me, or something else will happen. Some lunatic I get unbelievable hate mail all the time, and some lunatic will kill me or whatever. I don't care, because I'm doing this regardless of the dangers, because it's more important than any one life.
And I think that's a perfect thought to finish the show. The book, just out, called A New World. Where is it available, Whitley?
Amazon right now. It's on Kindle. It is available as a paperback, and it is will be available shortly as an ebook. As an Audible book. I read it myself.
And where can they find you online? Tell them about your website, please.
My website's unknowncountry.com. It's a big, active website. There's lots of people on it.
Very big.
There's a free message board that you can be involved in. If you subscribe to it, you can make comments and join basically what's a big social group of people who are serious about close encounters.
Whitley Strieber, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure.
My Alien Life Podcast.
You can find my website at www.myalienlifepodcast.com, and please subscribe to my latest downloads at iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, and at podbean.com. And please follow me and like me on Facebook and Twitter. My Alien Life is written and produced for broadcast at Studio 254 in the Northern Rocky Mountains. The music you are hearing is produced and created by Elion. You can find all Elion's work online at Heart Dance Records.